Well, aloha, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that little video opening. You've made it all the way to the closing plenary of Energy Efficiency as a Resource 2021. So congratulations for that. And congratulations also for showing up for what I guarantee you will be the most thought-provoking, the most entertaining, the most exciting closing plenary you've ever participated in. Because our topic for today is getting energy efficiency to scale, breakthroughs and breakouts. Now you can tell from that breathlessly exciting title that the panelists we pulled for you today, experts from all across the country, are not here to talk about incremental change or little nice to-dos. They're going to challenge each and every one of you out there with big ideas for taking EE big time in the way that's needed to meet both the crises and the opportunities today. So let me start off by introducing myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gene Rodriguez from ICF and ACEEE. ICF is a global advisory firm focused on building a more prosperous and resilient world for all. But today, I'm especially excited and honored to be your moderator for this panel because specifically, we've got some folks who are really going to open our eyes, open our minds to some new thinking. But before we jump into that, let's warm up a little so we don't pull a hamstring or anything. Let's start with a few housekeeping announcements. First and foremost, a moment of gratitude. Thank you to each and every one of you who are participating today, but thank you especially to the sponsors and ally members for their support of this conference, but also for their support for ACEEE. Second housekeeping item is I want to ask each and every one of you to complete the conference evaluation when this session is over. There are two reasons for doing that. Number one, it helps us to create the best content for each and every one of you. But more importantly, if you are greedy, anyone who completes the evaluation and includes their name and a short testimonial, you're going to receive a discount to attend the next EER conference in 2023. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in today's program. So now with those housekeeping announcements out of the way, I want to start off by introducing you to our format for today. Now, we brought 4 speakers for you, 4 nationally recognized experts, and each one of them was hand-selected by a blue ribbon panel here at ACEEE because they bring a different perspective to the table. So we're going to start off by allowing each and every one of them to give a brief opening statement to you so that you get a sense of who they are and you get a sense of what the perspective is that they're bringing to the table on this incredibly important topic of breakthroughs and breakouts. Then we're going to follow that up. The time for being nice will be over. You and I, audience and moderator alike, are going to subject these panelists to a rigorous cross-examination. So to do that, I'm going to ask a favor of you. If you look on that side of your screen, you should see on the right-hand side of your screen the little chat boxes. As we go along and as questions occur to you that you want to have these panelists answer, please write them in that chat box. I'm going to be reading them as we go along. I'm going to curate the questions, and I will ask these panelists to answer your questions and account to you as we enter the Q&A period of our session. Okay? Does that sound like a deal? Well, I think we're ready to roll then. If I can pull up my panelists, please, Lynn. I'm going to introduce you to them one at a time. As I said, they will each get an opportunity to give an opening statement. And I'm pulling a number out of the hat. I see our first speaker is going to be Chris Dufresne. Chris is president of the Center for Energy and the Environment. For those of you who don't know, the center is a nonprofit whose mission is to discover and deploy the most cost-effective approaches for strengthening energy, the economy, and improving the environment. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Chris. Chris, the audience awaits your answer to this question. What do you think is the single most important thing we need to do collectively to ramp up and scale up energy efficiency to the levels needed to address the challenges and opportunities of today? Chris? Over to you.
All right. Thanks, Gene. No pressure at all after that introduction, so I appreciate that. So I want to start with talking a little bit about just a presentation I saw yesterday. Senator Jennifer McClellan, state senator from Virginia, who was talking about Schoolhouse Rock in the 70s and how that particular one, I think it was called The Energy Blues, inspired her. I love that presentation. I'm a child of the 70s. I remember gas lines in my station wagon, or in the back seat of the station wagon that my parents were driving. And it's also the time that really created our industry, right? I mean, it's the federal policy of the 1970s, the reaction to the energy crisis that created the industry we are today. So if you think of things like state building codes, appliance standards, the weatherization assistance program, demand side management programs really came out of all that federal legislation that was kind of driven back to the states. Energy efficiency and rate making, that was something that came from the federal government directing PUCs to take that into account. R&D, tax incentives, all this stuff. And so my own organization, it came out of that. So we were born in 1979. We were originally the Minneapolis Energy Office, and then we eventually became Center for Energy and Environment, a nonprofit. And since that time, have been innovating at the state level. You've been to enough ACEEE conferences probably that you've heard, states are the laboratory of innovation. And that's all true, because that's all what all of us have been doing since that time. Is innovating at the state level, growing our programs, growing policy. These are the things my organization does here in Minnesota. And then most recently, we have an energy efficiency resource standard, 2007. A lot of the other states have done that around the same time. We just passed a fuel switching law that's going to allow us to electrify as we do more efficiency as well here in Minnesota. So all of you have been doing similar work in your states and getting great results. But there are limits to what we can scale at that state level. And here in Minnesota, we are inherently cheap. We're cheap people. And Midwesterners are inherently cheap in general. Our utility rates are low, so we're competing against low rates when we're doing energy efficiency. And we can scale more than we are now, and we certainly will through policy and programs. But my pitch is that we need to get back to a really comprehensive federal energy policy to meet the crisis that we have today, much like we met the crisis in the 1970s. So we need a focused policy that it needs to focus on innovation of future technologies, things like heat pumps, the next generation of heat pumps in cold climates like mine, the next generation of commercial heating technologies, because we're grossly behind there. And we need federal incentives that are directed towards building owners, towards homeowners, so that we can align those with the infrastructure that we've all been building up over the past 40 years at the state level. We're very good at aligning those things because we're very flexible at the state level, but we don't have the purse strings that the federal government can bring to the table. So that's my pitch. It's not just the bill that's up in Congress right now, although it's incredibly important, and that's a great start. Whatever passes, hopefully here in the next several weeks, but it's going to be developing policy for years to come, so that we can truly scale up energy efficiency to the resource that it should be if we're really going to meet the climate crisis.
Well, thank you very much for that, Chris. You set a high bar indeed for the panelists to follow. That's a pretty compelling argument, panelists. I hear from Chris that federal policy leadership, federal action, and federal funding level is needed to break through and break out. But I want to hear from the rest of you before I make my vote as to which one of you is right, because only one of you can be right. So next, let's go to Bill LeBlanc, our next panelist. You all know Bill as the guy who has the coolest job title in the whole of the industry. He's the Chief Instigation Agent at eSource. eSource, of course, is a solutions-based research, consulting, and data science firm that's been a change agent in the industry for over 30 years. Bill, you heard what Chris had to say. I know you have a differing opinion. How do you acquit yourself in the face of what Chris has said?
Thanks, Gene. Way to set expectations, as Chris alluded to, is that this has to be the best panel you've ever seen. So set expectations low, and then we can exceed them, Gene. So Chris, one comment on your 1970 station wagon. We sat in the front seat, not in the back seat, and we had no seat belts. So we have come a long way. So I love that part. So it's more of a, Gene, yes, and, right? So yes, we need federal policy. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Not enough. You alluded to kind of the state level. And what I really want to do is say about, I can't remember how long ago it was, before COVID. So it was either 1 year or 7 years ago. And we got about 24 national EE experts together with the very question of how do we ramp up not just EE, but our skill set applied to things like electrification, transportation, buildings, and how do we ramp that up? And we spent 2 days just pouring great idea after great idea, and certain things floated to the top. So the one that was right at the peak was regulatory reform and legislative reform. And I'm going to focus on regulatory reform, which means that from my standpoint, that means how can we shift a system that was really built, a regulatory system that was really built in the mid 1900s, when power plants got bigger and bigger and were more and more efficient and delivered lower and lower rates to people. That hasn't been the case since probably the 70s, as Chris talked about. So it's not the time for PBR. 15 years ago was time for PBR. We're just really, really late. So performance-based regulation, as I look at it, is we have to set our goals at a much higher level. So a lot of regulation says, these are the programs you have to do. This is how it has to be cost effective. It has to meet these tests. What PBR, I think, should do is say, we need to hit aggressive carbon goals. We need to hit aggressive grid management goals and get system load factors higher than they are. We need to have social equity in all of our customer programs. So by setting those goals higher and giving the utility way more ramp up time, so not rate cases every year that get checked in or every 3 years so that you're working on a rolling rate case all the time, and not the retrospective penalties that we see in some cases. But if you meet and exceed these goals, you get rewarded as a utility. That will allow innovation not only at the utility to occur, but in all of the different companies that surround the utility itself. So innovation starts to evolve when you let kind of that freedom happen. If you're constrained, if you're micromanaged, then that's going to just put you on a, we've had programs that we hear about from utilities where they have a goal for their energy efficiency programs. They meet their goal in 30 days or 45 days, and they shut the program down. Instead of funneling more money into this successful program, or the more likely answer is the rebates were way too high. So if you let the utilities innovate and optimize, and the goals are set around overall carbon reduction, overall rate reduction, overall keeping the number of kilowatt hours consumed down, then we can really start to see what happens underneath and bubbles up as far as innovation. So the other part is we have a lot of times in rate cases, regulatory dockets, we're at a program by program level. The utilities and all of the folks that deal with utilities are smart enough to know what works and what doesn't work and how to be fair about allocation of money. So if those are two big goals. So EE and DR and natural gas efficiency, electrification, transportation electrification, that is all one thing under PBR in my view. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gene, and then hopefully we'll have time to talk about this a little bit more later.
Well, we're going to have to, because I have to admit I'm torn. You and Chris are on different sides of my screen, but I'm taken with both your arguments. As a child of the 70s myself, I recognize that as an era of really bad fashion, pretty bad haircuts, but great music and great regulatory innovation that has stalled out. So I think you're right, Bill. I think innovation comes when you align regulation with freeing up forces. But I gotta also think that Chris is right, that to do things at a massive scale, why think state when federal makes it the case? I don't know what to do. The only thing I can do is to turn to the next expert and see what she has to offer for us. So our next speaker will be Lisa Wood, who's Vice President of Customer Solutions at the Edison Electric Institute, but also the Executive Director of the oft name changed Institute for Electric Innovation. IEI, in my opinion, Lisa, this is not what you guys say, but I think it's a combination think tank, catalyst for change, and forum for sharing and spreading the best practices for clean electric solutions. I applaud you for that work, but now you have to stand up and meet the level that Chris and Bill have set before you. So what do you think is the single most important thing we should be focused on to unleash energy efficiency at the levels required to make a meaningful change?
Thank you, Gene, for the intro, and for and thank you to the other speakers for their really interesting opening thoughts. So what I would like to focus on is energy efficiency as a carbon resource. And this takes into account some of the comments that Bill just made, and also moving from the 1970s to the 2020s, right? So Chris talked about how all these things got started pretty much in the 1970s with a lot of federal policy and regulation. And 50 years later, energy efficiency hasn't changed all that much in terms of how we're doing it. So I think we kind of all are at, sort of the energy efficiency 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. We're kind of at that place, and we're starting to see things change. So from my perspective, having sort of, the freedom to innovate, I think that's what carbon brings to the table. So it's not just about, you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. But if carbon is the goal, carbon emissions reductions, then it allows for a lot of different ways to meet that goal. So let me just say a couple of things about sort of where I see some things that are already starting to change and how we might move forward. So I will say that this is a topic, the carbon energy efficiency as a carbon resource, that we've been thinking about for, I guess, about the last 2 years, and sort of how to move that forward. During that time, the California Public Utilities Commission has come out with a big change in how California is going to measure energy efficiency programs. So that came out just, I think it was June of this year, no, actually late May of 2021, where the CPUC announced that utility energy efficiency programs would start that we would start to actually look at carbon reductions and not just KWH savings. This is a huge big deal, right, in terms of how we measure efficiency programs, because we know that you can have the same, you can have 3 different programs that all achieve the same savings in terms of KWH savings, but they don't all achieve the same carbon reductions. So I think I know I'm talking to a group of people that know a lot about energy efficiency, but what this starts to take into account is when is the energy efficiency occurring? Where is the energy efficiency occurring? And what's the carbon reduction that's happening at that time? So this is very important for really changing and making it a lot more flexible in terms of how energy efficiency programs get put together and implemented. So I'll just give a couple of examples. So we have the CPUC decision, and then I'll just, one thing that I like to kind of bring up as a good example of bringing all pieces of the pie together to reduce carbon is SCE's Clean Energy Optimization Program. And this is not actually an energy efficiency program, but it's a program that Southern California Edison put together in partnership with universities, because universities wanted to reduce carbon in the most effective ways. So that pilot is underway. how do we reduce carbon? Let's bring all resources to the table, including energy efficiency resources. So I view that as a really good example of how things are changing and in response to the customer. And then the second thing I'll just bring up is just in general, corporate customers, and now we've also seen this under the Biden administration, federal customers, agencies, and the DoD are all basically asking, for carbon-free energy solutions so that they can reduce their carbon emissions. So as utilities start to respond to customers, and as they have been and will do more so, then this changes sort of how do we help that customer get to their carbon emissions goals. But customers, this is my last part of the comment, Jean. Customers have moved from just, basically at the end of the year saying, hey, I use this much energy in terms of kWh, and this is my carbon number, and just it doesn't matter when it happened or where it happened, to saying we know that we were not carbon free when we basically come up with that annual number, and what we need to focus on is 24/7. So every hour of the year, what are we using? What's on the grid? And how can we reduce carbon? Energy efficiency is a key resource there, right? We have supply side resources, but also demand side resources. And the timing matters. The timing and the location matters. So I think there are many things pointing towards energy efficiency as a carbon resource. And I think that will bring energy efficiency to a much higher level. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Jean.
Wow, I'm really troubled now. I feel bad for you, Andy, because I thought you were batting in the catbird seat. Batting cleanup is usually where you want to be, but after Chris and Bill made those compelling arguments, Lisa walked in and I think made a pretty powerful statement about going into our closets, cleaning out the old bell-bottom jeans, cleaning out the Nehru jackets, and starting to modernize the way we think about energy efficiency and using it as a framework for thinking of EE as a carbon resource as the way to start to reinvent efficiency. So, Andy, I don't know what you could possibly add to that, but I know you're the founder and president of Sealed, a home wellness company on a mission to make homes healthy and comfortable, as well as cleaner for the planet, as the big guru of a firm that was named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies of 2021. You must have something different to add than our first three panelists have offered. So I turn it to you, Andy, for your opening statement.
Thanks, Gene. I'll do my best, but like you said, cleaning up here is going to be a little difficult. To answer your question, and I'll get into more details, but to scale energy efficiency, we got to bring it to the people. So a little bit of background on that. So Andy Frank, founder, president of Sealed, as you mentioned, Gene. What we do is in kind of more industry parlance terms is we provide performance financing to single family homeowners. So in other words, we cover the upfront costs of deep retrofits, things like weatherization, heat pumps, smart thermostats and controls, and we're only paid back based on the actual energy saved. And we also guide the customer from beginning to end with a remote concierge sales process in coordination with local home performance contractors. So my career at Sealed, as well as before that, I'll take a little bit of a issue with Lisa. One of my former companies was called Efficiency 2.0. So I actually think we're on Efficiency 3.0, if not 4.0 now. But my career has been really focused on consumer adoption of energy efficiency. And so unsurprisingly, I think that the key to scaling energy efficiency is to focus on the consumer. To do that, right, to scale energy efficiency and focus on the consumer, what that means is we need to stop talking about energy use and energy bills and start talking about how energy efficiency really impacts people's lives. In other words, as I like to say, the first rule of energy efficiency is don't talk about energy efficiency. But to be clear, I think the way to scale energy efficiency ultimately is through many of the things that all of you have said, Chris, Bill, and Lisa. In particular, through aggressive performance standards. I think, all of that great policy in the 70s, a lot of the great policy we've had since then have been through, boring things like energy efficiency appliance standards and things that really kind of change the industry and change the technology that we have. But the only way that we really get those aggressive performance standards is by demonstrating the consumer acceptance as well as excitement, right? You don't want someone to just accept something, right? They need to be excited about the technology, and leverage that with industry and government stakeholders to be able to put in that more aggressive performance standards. Sorry. So we demonstrate consumer acceptance, therefore, by focusing on what most of us in this virtual room probably call non-energy benefits, right? Things like comfort, health, safety, and convenience. And what my sales team just calls benefits, right? What normal people just call benefits, right? What they actually experience in their lives. The truth is that when it comes to deep retrofits, we found that consumers care more about non-energy benefits like comfort than saving money on their bill or even getting free money rebates, which is kind of unbelievable. So, for example, based on some marketing tests that Sealed has done with some of our utility partners, people were over 40% more likely to open an email with a comfort-oriented subject line versus one that talked about a rebate amount. So this is something that really resonates with people and we need to focus on. But that said, we've also found that consumers also care about energy performance, but not for the reasons that you may think. We found that energy savings are a proxy for quality related to comfort and other non-energy benefits. So in other words, if people know that they're saving energy, that energy savings are going to be there, they know they're going to be comfortable, more healthier, better quality of life in their home. So, to take this to another extreme, for example, my company offers, as I mentioned, a performance financing product that in many cases will actually increase customers' total energy budget. So if customers save what we think they're going to save, depending on their project scope and depending on what they do, they might actually pay a little bit more than they do today. But that's actually okay, and customers still value the performance aspect of the finance because they know that someone has skin in the game in terms of that project impact. So really listening to the customer can have a big impact on that millstone that's across all of our necks, right? Called cost effectiveness. And Chris, I think alluded to that before in a lot of CE's work. So last year, National Grid ran a survey to determine what levers could increase the adoption of weatherization. And as part of that survey, they tested the impact of offering performance financing as well as the impact of different rebate levels. And the performance financing program offer, without any incentives, without any rebates, led to a 2.5 times increase in the expected adoption of weatherization from about 18% to about 44%, which in context represents was the equivalent impact of offering a 50% or $4,500 rebate. So in other words, really listening to the customer is something that can make a big impact in adoption and a big impact in the program impacts that we all want to make. But it comes from not from a techno-economic model all the time. It comes from really listening to the consumer and the market. So I'll end on this in terms of the change that we need into scale energy efficiency is that programs need to be fundamentally changed to enable the market to build the right non-energy benefit propositions to the customers. So currently, I think we all need to be honest in this virtual room that most energy efficiency programs are built in the same way that utilities build the grid, right? Command and control with little flexibility and an obsession over cost effectiveness. We need to build, in my opinion, a new performance program structure that is market aligned, attracts new trade allies, and focuses on pay for performance midstream and upstream incentives rather than fixed downstream rebates. And I will reference, I think, Bill, some of your firm's research has backed that up as well. But regardless of the details, we need to make sure that every effort we make as an industry is focused on meeting the needs of the consumer and building on that to achieve the aggressive policy outcomes that we all know are needed to scale energy efficiency.
I have to say, this is a message for those of you in the audience today. I promised you at the outset that we brought 4 experts who not only brought differing perspectives, but have absolutely no fear of making the compelling case for their point of view. And I think they have all acquitted themselves exceptionally well. But I'm going to warn you now, panelists, that the audience, the participants at this conference, they're no slouches either. They're already filling the chat box with really, I thought I was a mean guy, a tough guy, a former litigator, etc. What I'm seeing here are questions of, it's a Spanish Inquisition of questions for you. So instead of starting off with my questions, I'm going to jump into some of the questions from the audience right off the bat. The way I will do it is I will ask a question, I'll paraphrase it a little bit, and then I'll invite you guys to just hop in and answer the questions from your own perspective. If you don't have anything to add, okay to pass. But I want to start off, we talked about Minnesota nice earlier. There's another gentleman in our audience today who hails from the Midwest, but is not a nice person. It's Marty Kushler. And Marty wants to put you through the paces right away, because he points out that there are 4 basic sources of funding to accomplish the extensive and deep energy efficiency retrofits that'll need to be done. It can come from the customer, it can come from the utility, it can come from potential investors, or it could come from the government. You guys have touched on that in some shape or form. But what Marty brings up is that under current costs and energy prices, the expense of these deep EE retrofits that are going to be needed typically don't have the payback, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, the payback that is attractive individually to the customer, to the utility, constrained by the same traditional benefit cost test that you referenced, Andy, or to investors. So if money is part of the solution, how are we going to get enough money to get the work done? I open it to any one of you who wants to be first to take on Marty Kushler, the meanest person from the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because I wrote down a bunch of stuff. Thank you, Marty, for challenging us. Sorry you're not on the panel as well. Well, one is our carbon prices are just way, way, way low. Our health prices, all of the NEB that Andy talks about, all of that stuff doesn't go into the planning models. And so energy efficiency and renewables to some extent don't get all those benefits. So that's crazy. We just need to get those prices up where they really are, the long-term risk, health factors, all of that. The other thing that's really interesting is that, remember when solar was, rooftop solar was just for crazy people in the Colorado mountains? It became mainstream. Why? Because of a business model similar to the one that Andy had built. There is a lot of money when you buy an electric vehicle. So if you actually bundle the savings, the gasoline savings from an electric vehicle compared to buying gasoline, and then match that with your apartment or your house, then you've got another stream of money that you can actually pull. So maybe 4 sources of funding instead of 5 sources instead of 4. And so I haven't seen that business model evolve yet, and the utilities don't like to be the banks. Understood, but putting all of that together, I think, will make a big, big difference, and hopefully that will come soon. We've got a local company who's looking at that right now, is bundling EE, solar, and electric vehicles in one package. So those are my 2 things.
Thanks, Bill. To add on to that, I'm originally from the Midwest, from outside Chicago, but I've been in the New York area for a long time. So I used to be Midwest nice gene, but I think I've lost a little bit of my cred there. I think Marty's question is, I think, one that is kind of one of the fundamental both challenges, as well as, frankly, I think the trap that the industry has fallen in over the last, whatever, let's call it 50 years. I'll break it down into, I'll reduce the number of buckets. I'll break it down to 3 buckets of where value comes from, right? It comes from the energy bill savings, right? And that's affected by all the things we talked about, usually in cost effectiveness, energy prices and capacity values, things like that. It comes from the, call it the externality impacts, right? So you can bucket carbon, and I'll put the, future grid development costs or lack thereof, capacity value, et cetera, actually in that bucket. And then the third is, what we call non-energy benefits. But I don't view that actually as having really any impact on cost effectiveness tests per se. Really, that's something that the market values. And that's a huge value, right? So, we have investors, we have a lot of people who are expecting to make a lot of money with our company, for example, and so they want a return, but they don't necessarily care whether that value is coming from any of those three buckets, as long as it's there. And I think that third bucket, that non-energy benefits, has been thought of in the wrong way by the industry. It's been thought of as something that we need to plug into a cost effectiveness test. Whereas, like, I really don't care. In fact, I just would rather just have both the cost and the benefits subtracted from that to keep it easily. But what's really important is those benefits are the reasons that real people do this. And so we need to let the market value those benefits. And that's where the money comes from, right? The money comes from my customers valuing comfort, right? They pay for new kitchens, new cars, new everything all the time. They should also pay for a better quality of life in their home, and they do.
I'll jump in and also just back up that Marty Kushler is the meanest guy in the Midwest. I can attest to that. I just struck by Bill was talking about solar, and I'm because I keep thinking, one of the reasons solar has been so successful is the government incentives and the government investments, particularly countries like Germany and China that really drove down the cost of solar, but also the incentives we have here in the United States. Again, federal incentives that we don't really match in terms of energy efficiency. But I think Marty's work on cost effectiveness has been extremely important. If you haven't read a lot of Marty's work, the paper Ditch the TRC Test is one of my favorites, but also his work on the NSPM, cost effectiveness modeling that a number of people contributed to. That kind of reform needs to happen at the state level. We need to reform our cost benefit tests. The way they work right now is not incentivizing longer term investments. And it's not incentivizing the kind of carbon savings that Lisa was talking about in her presentation. So I think the answer is we need to, all these investment streams need to come together. Those can be coordinated at the state level. We're very adept at doing that, at coordinating federal, private, and state and utility funds all together through programs at the state level. But we need to start making those investments in order to coordinate them.
Lisa, I want you to have the last word on this question because I'm going to ask you a pointed question. Is Marty's work on updating cost effectiveness tests, on coming up with a new standard practice manual to be used throughout the country as a model, is that going far enough, or is your call for a muscular carbon metric something that requires even more?
Well, let me just make this comment before I go to that. And I think this is maybe a little dangerous, but can we learn something from sort of the corporate side? So Bill talked about bundling, basically energy efficiency, renewables, electric vehicles. But if you look at what corporates are doing, corporates are saying, okay, we want to reduce carbon emissions. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it in our buildings. We're going to do it with what we purchase in terms of electricity and other energy. And we're going to do it by transitioning our fleet to electric. Why are they doing that? Because they have to report their carbon numbers. That's why they're doing it, right? Because their customers care. And they have to say, basically, we're doing this to reduce our carbon numbers. So I would just put out there, is there a way that we can learn from that for the residential customers? To basically, there's a reason, right, why corporate America is leading in this area. Because they want to keep their customers, right? Again, we've been sort of focused on the residential side, but I think we've sort of seen that start to unfold on the commercial side. And I think we'll see it also with these larger customers, federal agencies and DoD also starting to do this under the current administration. That's just a thought on Marty's question. And then you have to tell me again what your question is, Gene, because I don't remember it. Or maybe I said
what I'm asking is our carbon adder. I'll take it and I'll make it even worse. Are carbon adders going to be sufficient to introduce this notion of a carbon metric that you're talking about, a carbon target, a carbon focus for EE programs, or do we need to do much more? Is it more than just tinkering with cost effectiveness tests, tinkering with adders, making other sorts of adjustments? Are you a bomb throwing radical who's telling us we need to throw all that out and then start anew with a carbon metric? What is the case you're trying to make?
I think the CPUC is going in the right direction with accounting for having a carbon value and taking into account, I mean, I think of it as a pie, right? Energy efficiency, time, location, and carbon, right? Those three things. I think that's the right direction. That's the right direction to move energy efficiency into a different space than it is today. So that's my sort of short answer, I guess, to that.
I like that. You obviously rehearsed that in front of a mirror because that's very memorable. I like that. Time, location, carbon. Let's make sure we don't lose that. I'm going to go, Marty. We spent way too much time talking about you. Let's go to yet another one of our audience members here. Maureen McNamara from EPA is in the house, as the young people like to say, and I know for a fact that she's working on what are the levers that can create very broad, not just acceptance, but an embrace of energy efficiency in the modern world. And one of the things that I know she's wrestling with is this notion of, as we look at energy efficiency and the value of energy efficiency in a decarbonizing electric grid, how do we connect the dots between the values that energy efficiency can bring and its impact on reducing the scale and the size of the footprint, and let's be honest, the cost of decarbonizing the electric utility sector? Do you guys see that there's some sort of connection that could happen? Chris, at the federal level to help this happen? Andy, at the consumer level, does this make sense for them as well? Or is this one of those things where it's good cocktail party chatter for a group of energy propeller heads like ourselves, but it's not going to make a difference in the real world? Who wants to take on Maureen's challenge? How do we connect the dots between decarbonizing the grid and the costs and challenges of that and energy efficiency in the modernized world?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Maureen. I saw your question. It's a great question because it's the one that has so much tension right now as beneficial electrification is getting so much attention, which makes total sense. Again, if you go up a level and you're not doing programs, if you're not dictating what programs exist and how much EE, it will naturally flow. So if your carbon metric is one of your biggest goals, then you will see over a decade. So I'll use Excel Energy in Colorado as an example. We're going from about 25% renewables to 80% renewables in the next 9 years. So the decisions that are made today are going to be completely different than the ones that are made in 2030. So EE becomes, from a carbon standpoint, less valuable if that carbon metric is there. And so if decarbonization is met. But then we have other standards. So one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is the social equity element. So the businesses that can afford to focus on carbon reduction and the households that can afford to do that are great. We ought to be targeting those, and we have to target the right customers with the right programs, and they can't all afford what we're talking about. So it comes down to, from a social equity standpoint, how can we also bring beneficial electrification, energy efficiency, and even more important, comfort and lower bills? This is a project that Lisa and I are working on together right now, is to identify that through ethnographic research, doing it through kind of the data science side, so we can do the targeting to bring the right programs to the right people, because it's not one size fits all at all. It's like a whole bunch of sizes fit a whole bunch of different people. I get excited about this, Gene.
I know this is fabulous. Andy, I'm looking at your box on my screen now. You used a phrase that I love. In fact, I scribbled it down here with my little pen. That's not how normal people think of things. So let me ask you, how do normal people, the people we're assuming we want to either inspire or somehow trick into making these investments and changing the way they live and work and changing the buildings that they live and work in, how do we reach normal people and make the case that energy efficiency actually helps not just them in their homes, but the cost of meeting the challenges of climate?
So, so many years back, the past company, I helped run a demand response, like a plug load demand response program, and I actually did a bunch of was involved in, did a little bit of myself, ethnographic research around this to Bill's point. And the thing that actually surprised me was, we tested a lot of different motivations for why people would want to participate in this kind of thing. And the thing that actually came through as the strongest message for reason to participate is because people wanted to do their part to keep the lights on, right? Everybody kind of recognizes that they're part of the grid. It's the reason that you see, kind of some of the flex campaign alerts in California, at least for a while, till they kind of overused it a little bit, be very, very, very successful. So I think sometimes you have to give consumers credit in ways that we sometimes don't like to give them credit in terms of their appreciation, understanding of the bigger picture. But I think to more directly answer Maureen's question, I think I will actually say this is an exception to my rule of this is all about the consumer. I think the problem here is actually on the regulatory side and the and sending the right value to the market. The way that I think about it is that we have an actual peak that we have today on the electricity side, and then we have a shadow peak, right? And that shadow peak is essentially what the electricity peak is going to be once we move towards a more electrified future. And we can all, discuss and argue exactly what that's going to look like and when, but it's going to probably move in that direction in one way, shape, or form. But the problem is energy efficiency today is being valued at best, right, off of today's peak, not off of that future shadow peak. And so if we want the market to respond to what we think that future grid is going to look like, or to bring down the costs, right, we need to actually build that into the pricing of programs, into the pricing of the of the systems. Well, there's a lot of different mechanisms, right? You guys are much smarter than me in exactly how to make that happen. But I think it fundamentally comes from the fact that that from a policy perspective, from a state and federal perspective, we haven't really acknowledged what the future is going to look like in a way that actually makes its way down to real world pricing decisions. Because I think actually energy efficiency, this is the group for it, is worth a hell of a lot more than most states give it credit for, because of this issue around the shadow peak.
So, Jean, I want to weigh in here also. One of the things we haven't touched on really is the role of technology in the home, right? So, I mean, we've seen this, we've talked about it forever, but I think we now see it as we see apps that, technology companies are developing. We see data analytics and data science to target customers for certain kinds of programs, whether it's a demand response program or an efficiency program. People can see their savings, they can see their carbon footprint, they can see when their electric vehicle is charging. This is something that just makes it so much simpler, right, for the customer, and results in usually more energy savings, right? So I think that, one other piece of scaling energy efficiency is just really putting technology to work. And there's lots of technology companies out there, including, Bill's company, now with their data analytics work, that are making this happen for customers, because it's either we're targeting the right customers or we're making it easy for customers to do things that used to be, and this isn't a deep retrofit, right? These are efficiency or demand response measures, but that's the future, right? These are real resources that can be automated and, put into the residential customers' hands without, and used as grid resources. So I think that's a super important part of the future of energy efficiency and demand response is that we have talked about technology in the home forever, but we actually are doing it now in a lot of different places.
Chris, I'm going to apologize for not giving you an opportunity to step in on this one, because Ross Welterin asked a question, and Ross, with apologies to you, I'm going to start off by agreeing with you, but I'm going to change your question a little bit because you have sparked a thought in my noggin. And Ross comments that I think we all agree. I think the four of you have done a tremendous job of suggesting avenues, pathways that taken together can figure out how to get inertia going to get moving toward at the federal level, at the state level, through regulation and in people's homes and kitchen tables, to get people focused on doing more efficiency. But where's the real world thinking about this? When we look out the window at the industry that's out there, we see that there aren't enough people right now, technicians, to do the energy efficiency work that is in front of us today, much less this broadly scaled up version. We see people out there who just aren't going to be convinced by the excellent arguments you're all making, and they create roadblocks to moving forward. So let me ask the four of you to weigh in on what are those roadblocks and how should we address them? If we want to take this from being actually a very interesting conversation and make it an important one, we got to figure out how to make it fly in the real world. Who wants to take on Ross's question first?
Well, I'll start. So we're in a purple state here in Minnesota. We're the only divided legislature in the country, and so we've had to work really hard in improving our pitch to both sides of the aisle when it comes to policy change and energy efficiency. And we had a lot of success this past year passing the ECO Act. Part of that was more engagement with rural communities, very conservative rural co-ops that didn't want to do traditional efficiency anymore, but were really motivated by the potential for their communities through electrification. And so the ability to combine those efforts to allow them to feel like they're growing again as a rural community was really important. So rural economic development arguments, I think, are very powerful. The other one that I think Gene is kind of alluding to in the question is jobs. And that does play well in all sorts of communities. So when we can talk about growing efficiency jobs in rural communities, because we are closing coal plants where they are losing jobs, we have a much better chance. So growing workforce development programs that focus both on all sorts of underserved sectors. So we're growing one in Minneapolis, St. Paul, focused on people of color in Minneapolis and St. Paul, because we have a huge gap in terms of unemployment rates between white and non-white folks in the Twin Cities. But we're also planning to expand that into rural Minnesota so we can grow jobs there as well. So those kinds of things play well with all sorts of communities: jobs, economic development. And then, on the customer side, I think a lot of the things Andy's talking about, I mean, we really do sell efficiency a lot more through comfort than we do through talking about climate change.
Yeah.
Can I just have a quick anecdote that I think underscores the point that Chris just ended on, and I'll turn it over from there. When we talk about comfort, I think people think of this like very even like kind of like hazy, like, yeah, I'm like a little bit warmer, a little bit in the winter, a little bit cool in the summer, and that's true. But there's a lot more like fundamental pain points that energy efficiency can solve. One of my favorite stories from that one of my sales reps told me a couple of years back was we were talking to a customer, and he had a frog we call a freezing room over the garage. So he has a garage and it's not insulated, and so his daughter's bedroom is above that, so the daughter gets really cold. And so, of course, in the winter, daughter gets really cold. She comes and sleeps with mommy and daddy from October to March or whenever that is, right? And so my sales rep Jay was talking to the customer on the phone, and he said, trying to we teach our sales reps to probe for pain, right? Like, oh, are you uncomfortable? And he's like, no, I'm fine, whatever. Maybe I don't need this, whatever. Goes, okay, well, would anybody else in your family say that they've got a problem? It's like, oh, well, my daughter's room is freezing. Like, okay, well, how does that affect you? And he says, well, she has to come sleep with me and my wife for 4 or 5 months of the year. And he's like, okay, well, does that inconvenience you? He's like, yeah, it's kind of inconvenient. I'll do the PG-13 version, right? Like, I kind of like to have my cuddle time with my wife without my daughter there. So this guy doesn't have a comfort problem, right? He has a no snuggling problem for the winter, right? And I think that those are the kinds of things, those are the kind of impacts that we can really have if we think about energy efficiency in a more holistic sense.
Yeah. And Gene, if I can, I can just jump in. There's two things that struck me, and again, every question has been fantastic. So one is I've learned to really stop paying attention to people who are naysaying for naysaying purposes. So it's just a waste of our time. And as analytical people, I'm an engineer, marketer type person. I want to answer everybody's question, but guess what? It wastes our time. So yes, let the politicians work on that. We need to lead with the people in the states that are willing to lead, and the cities who are willing to lead. There are cities in every state of this country that want to lead on efficiency, carbon reduction, electric transportation. And the other is, if those states do it, it's going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And guess what? Then the naysayer places are going to need to adopt because it's cheaper, because they look at the difference between, let's say, Iowa with 65, 70% renewable energy through wind, and their next door neighbor, they have the same wind. In fact, they use it before Iowa gets it, Nebraska, and they just don't have that. And guess what? Economics is going to win for the wind state. Win for the wind.
Fabulous. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to truncate this, the answering of this question, because we are starting to run out of time. And I promised, audience, this is in a moment of weakness, knowing that you guys are going to be asking this level of question that really put this panel through their paces. I offered as bait to get these panelists on board. I offered them that they would have a good 45 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds at the end to be able to give you their kind of closing argument. And the closing argument has to be around this. We've talked about a lot of good ideas here. No, strike that. We've talked about a lot of great ideas here. What I want to know from each of you, and we'll go in reverse order. So we'll go Andy, Lisa, Bill, and Chris. You'll have the final say on this. What is the one thing you want people not to take away from this panel, but to do that might make a difference in scaling up EE when they log off of this, move away from their computer, and go back to their real world jobs? What's the one most important thing, Andy, I'll start with you, that folks should be doing right away to make a difference in scaling up EE to the levels required to meet the challenges and opportunities ahead? Andy?
Well, it's going to be a hug, and I'll explain why. So, as an industry, I think we need to be honest with ourselves. We're mostly, energy engineers, policy wonks, and geeks of various sorts. I consider myself one, so I'm not casting, Gene, but to scale energy efficiency, we really need to embrace and value sales and marketing, right? Which is really about connecting to the consumer. And instead of viewing it as wasteful or distasteful at best, or calling it code words like behavior, right? I was a behavior guy for a while. It's just sales and marketing, right? Let's call it what it is, right? Instead of doing that, we need to really focus on the consumer and really value sales and marketing. Think of the things that have scaled in your life, right? From the the Coca-Cola that you're drinking or the clothes that you're wearing, right? Chances are that sales and marketing played a big role in making that happen. So we can come up with the best technology and the most clever program and policy schemes, but at the end of the day, we need to win the hearts and minds of the consumer if we want to scale energy efficiency. So the one thing that I would ask everyone to do is go, either virtually or or in person, depending on where you are, what position you're in. Go hug someone from your sales and marketing department, right? Show them appreciation for the work that they do, because I think that in this industry we really need to show more love to that part of our industry.
That's the Midwest coming back out on you, Andy. That's
I'm half and half. I can be mean or nice. I decided to end on a nice note.
Lisa, what do you have to add?
Well, hey, I'm in Washington, D.C., and there are no huggers here. So it's a mean city, I can tell you. So what I would just say, I would just recommend that everybody look at the total systems benefit metric that the CPUC put out. I think it's I think it's good. I think it's worth looking at. The other thing I would say is to consider getting out of the energy efficiency silo. And what I mean by that is, so Bill and I are working on this project, low income, focus on low to moderate income customers, and what should they be getting for not just for like solutions, but services, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that go into how to serve the customer. And I think that energy efficiency is a piece of it, but it's only a piece of it. So the business of what's right for the customer, whether it's whether it's again beneficial electrification, energy efficiency, or a different way to pay their bill. I mean, that's a harder thing to deal with, but that's kind of what customers want. They want the solution that works for them. So I would just say, think about that, about the pie for the customer, not just the energy efficiency piece.
We had hugs and pies. Bill, what do you need to add?
Well, yeah, and so luckily I can do yes and, because mine builds exactly on what Lisa and Andy were talking about, which is we don't do enough work to understand the underlying fundamental wants and needs of the consumers, and so we start with technology. We do an analysis on this technology being better than that, and we do a technical potential. No, you start with the market. You don't start with the technical potential. You start with market. You start with people. And so my one piece of advice is to stop trying to educate your audience. And that audience can be regulators. It can be the end user. It can be commercial, industrial customers. What they want is intelligent advice, so that from a trusted source. And so think about that. So we did this with our ethnography, is move from educating and advertising and promotion to advising. And I think that's exactly what you found, Andy, in your business. And we found the same thing here in our Boulder County program. They just want advice, and then it moves markets in a huge way.
And that's it.
This is like a kumbaya moment. We've got hugs. We've got people treating people with respect and understanding where they're coming from and advising them.
I'm sorry.
You're going to have the final word on this answer. What is it that people should do when they leave here today?
I'm trying to bring it all together into one like feel good moment for you, but I am writing these all down because these are really great ideas. As I hear you all talk, the thing that strikes me is I feel like this moment is coming. Like we are going to scale up, and there's a number of reasons why. And I think you heard some of them today, but I don't think we even got to get to all of them. And so the number one thing I think we need to do is we need to go and look at our people. We need to look at the people you work with and the people you lead in your organizations. Make sure you're developing them. Make sure you're giving them the right opportunities to grow, and think about ways to attract new talent that hasn't been attracted before into our field, because we are going to need a lot more people doing a lot more work, and we need a much more diverse group of folks doing this work in all parts of our sector, from leadership to entry-level jobs. So let's get to work on that and just, focus on our talent, because that's what's going to get us there in the end.
I love it. That is the perfect close for the panel. The moment is coming. Let's get to work. So audience, I know if we were together in an in-person conference, this is the moment which you would rush the stage and pick up these panelists on your shoulders and carry them out in victory for the tremendous work they've done. I can only ask that what you do is you fill out the evaluation and say how much you enjoyed the insights and information these four panelists gave you. I want to thank each and every one of you who participated, from speakers to those of you in the audience and those of you who gave us questions, and invite you to do two things. Thing number one, if you missed any of this conference whatsoever, please know that on-demand versions of each of the panels are available online only for the participants and only for the next few months. So please go online, find those, catch up on anything you missed, and then promise me, every one of you, that I will see you in 2 years at Energy Efficiency as a Resource 2023 in Philly. I will buy anyone who shows up a cheesesteak, maybe, maybe not. but use that as an incentive to join us as we get back together 2 years from now to see the progress we've made in getting it done. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, especially each and every one of you who participated in not just this session, but EE as a Resource 2021. And with that, we panelists, we wave goodbye. We bid you a fair adieu. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we hope you get to work on the things that this set of 4 national experts have given us to do. So bye-bye all.
Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Gene.
Thanks, Gene.
Yeah, thanks, panel. Talk to you later.